You can't hang on to yourself. You don't have to try not to hang on to yourself. It can't be done. And that is salvation.
Welcome to the first episode of LilyList, where our goal is to be a handbook for the living. Each episode will do our best to capture stories, hear how others define legacies, and introduce people who can educate and inform all of us on how to better navigate this thing we call life. You can find more information at LilyList.com, including articles, resources, and ways that you can support our work going forward. In our first episode, we speak with my mother. I wanted to kick off this podcast with something personal, as I would never ask anyone to tackle something that I wouldn't take on myself. Judy has faced a number of challenges throughout her life, but seems to have always been willing to continue moving forward and do what was necessary to find meaning and joy where she could. Many of the topics that we covered in our conversations I'd never really discussed in detail with her before, so I hope that it is as interesting a conversation for you as it was for me. That was one thing I thought about after we talked last week was I remember, again, these are, I don't know if like normal people know this stuff about parents and stuff, but I know you mentioned before, like, was it Medfield? Were you born in Massachusetts or were you born somewhere else?
No, I was born in Hazleton.
Oh,
We're from
Pennsylvania. Okay.
Pennsylvania, coal mining country.
Yep.
And I was born in Hazleton, and my father was a salesman for General Foods. Now, my father was a guy who had a high school education. He went to the Navy where he met my mother. They were both in the Navy. They met, and they were both from Hazleton, and they got married. And eventually they moved to New Cumberland. He was a workaholic, my father, and he didn't drink. Maybe a beer here and there, but his father was an alcoholic, my grandfather. So he didn't like the looks of alcoholism, and he wasn't going to do that himself. So I think he had the tendencies. But what he did was he poured it all into his work. So every time he got a promotion, we would move. We were in New Cumberland, and then we moved to Pennsylvania. We moved to Norristown, where I went to grade school through 8th grade in New Cumberland. We always went to Catholic schools, which is another story in itself. But then when we got into 9th grade, we were in Norristown, which is we were in King of Prussia. I went to school in Norristown, and I spent 2 years. 2 years. The name of the school was Bishop Kendrick, and it was a uniform. It was a Catholic high school. I spent my freshman and sophomore year there, and then he got transferred again, and we moved down to Jacksonville, Florida. And as fate would have it, the Catholic high school down there was Bishop Kendrick. So I spent my junior and senior year at Bishop Kendrick High School in Jacksonville. Then just when I graduated, I was with my parents. I'd gotten a job. I was still with my parents, but he got a promotion they had to move to Chicago. And at the time I had applied to Jacksonville University. So I went off to college, and they went to Arlington Heights, Chicago. So I was more or less on my own, ill-equipped, I might add. I was very emotionally broken for whatever reasons. My emotions did not work right. It was nuts. I was at Jacksonville University, and I still can't remember what happened, but I was partying a lot and stuff. And I remember my father, the first semester, my father saying to me, I'm not gonna pay for you to drink your years away in college. But whatever happened, I think it was some kind of emotional type break. because I wound up, and I don't even remember what it was, but I left school and wound up in Medfield. I'm sorry, they were in Medfield at the time, and I wound up back with them in Medfield, and got a job, and I was in Medfield with my parents. I know my mother was very upset. It was like I shot the Pope. Whatever happened at school, I think I might have had a kind of a breakdown of sorts, but it was never talked about. I don't remember it, but I was home and got a job, and that's where I met your father. I got a job at Russ Craft, and your father worked there. He worked in the it was a card factory, a card place, and he worked in the factory. He was on a card line or whatever, and I was up in the offices. I was payroll, but I used to have to go down. It was the new era of the computers. I would have to go down through the factory and distribute time cards to all the areas, and that's where I met your father. Was at Rustcraft. He was living in Hyde Park at the time, and I was in Medfield, and then we just hooked up and got together, and probably a year and a half, 2 years after that, we moved to the Back Bay, him and I, because I was pregnant with you. So we moved to the Back Bay. It was kind of a really distorted time. I was drinking, and he was on heroin. It was very dangerous. But I don't remember a lot of that time. So I think I've always compartmentalized emotionally, because for some reason I never had a handle on them. And we were raised, you couldn't say anything like in the house. If something was going on, it was like, my mother would make it a point to say, this stays within these walls. And there was a lot of emotional. So I think my mother was she was like a general. As a matter of fact, my Uncle Red used to call her the general. But she had 7 kids. My father traveled all the time, and she was home with 7 kids. She didn't drive. She had a house you could eat off the floor, but she was not happy with having 7 kids, I don't think. But like I said, we had everything. We always lived in big houses and big suburbs, and we always had everything we wanted, private schools. And, as a matter of fact, when I got sober, that's why I like Southie so much. I would go to all the Southie movies because they used to say, in the suburbs, you know, people will say they're perturbed. And they'd say in Southie, we say we're pissed off. So I think, listening to that, I found out that there were other people that really could make mistakes and not suffer, the suffer the scorn of the general. So it took me a long time when I finally realized what exactly was going on and how, I say broken. I was really just broken emotionally. But I did get that resilience from my mother, and I got a sense of humor. I always say that, she used to drive me crazy, and she never wanted less than perfection, but she was a funny woman, and she had that resilience that no matter what, and I think that's probably what kind of saved me through a lot of these things. Is I would say to myself, you can't just fall apart. I mean, God forbid you fall apart. So I always had it within myself to kind of just look for something that was going to kind of save me. She was a good person. She just was not a happy person, and I don't think she was ill-equipped to handle all these kids. I mean, she had four toddlers, before she was under the age of uh, 4, when she was 25 or 26 or whatever. And then again, I look back and I say, I had 4 kids the same way. I mean, I had you kids. Marcy and Chris were Irish twins. They were 11 months apart. I had kids in 72, 74, 75, and 76. So there was a pattern there that I was repeating that I didn't even realize, I think. But,
Yeah.
looking back, saying to myself, I was ill equipped to repeat any kind of pattern that I saw saw my mother doing because she wasn't me. But I was told, we were all told, this is how you have to behave. This is how you. So that was kind of drummed into us. And I never realized that I could do it, and I look at the way like Marcy's raising her kids, and she's raising them like that, be whoever you are. And if you
Yeah.
make a mistake, that's so what?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So you kids have become like more examples to me. When I first, when you first started going on your own, I'd say, this is how Marcy does it. And I wanted to be like with grandkids, like I wanted to be a good grandmother. I didn't want to be my mother, but I would kind of watch Marcy, or I would kind of watch how, you could go out and, create all these things. I said, that's really fantastic. Stacy, you know, and Chris. I mean, it's just so, and it sounds corny, but it's true. I think, my kids have become my examples or my teachers, as I kind of say. And
Um,
I look at you kids and I say, can I incorporate that kind of thing, that kind of thinking into my life, or can I not? And if I can't, I go, well, that's all right, because that's them. It's not me. It's a great relief, and it's a great freedom too to kind of let people, and that includes kids and grandkids, everybody else, kind of find their own way, because I think that's basically what we're supposed to do, and spend the time kind of straightening myself out so that I can be, so I can be kind of an example. Like always wanted to be a better grandmother than I was mother, and I think I've been able to do that. And there's still things that I don't like in myself, and there's things that I probably shouldn't be doing as far as spoiling or whatever, but that's what I do. That's me. So it's a great relief and a great freedom at this point in my life. And I think that's what life is. Life is just kind of a journey. I think some people, you say legacy. I think some people can, leave a monetary legacy, which is great, and other people, it's just, am I making anybody, is somebody looking at me and saying, I like that or whatever. I just want to be a better person.
but I did want to say, because you mentioned being pregnant with me in Back Bay, I don't remember living in Back Bay. I seem to the first memories I have, which I think are real, but maybe not are. Um, I seem to like River Street or River Road in Hyde Park.
Yeah, River Street. I liked River Street. I was friggin' burning kitchen chairs because we didn't have any heat. Yeah, you were born in 72. We were living on Gloucester Street in a basement apartment when I was pregnant. I was probably pregnant. And when you were born, we were in Gloucester Street because they had to carry me up the steps when I went into labor or whatever. But shortly thereafter, we moved back. River Street was, we lived in Hyde Park there. We got this big old ramshackle apartment, and that's where you and Marcy and Chris. I'm trying to think because we moved up this. I don't know if you remember, but we moved about 3 blocks up River Street into another apartment. But River Street was where you were a toddler or whatever. We had Chinese people upstairs that gave you a bunny, Suki.
Vaguely recall that. What I recall about River Street was just I have random patchy thoughts of wandering around that area. And was it an old lady named Aunt B around the corner?
Oh my God, B was the Jewish neighbor. She was from Chelsea. She kind of adopted me and my brood.
And I
She was
remember she liked Chris.
she loved Chris because he had his curly hair and stuff. As a matter of fact, Chris stayed with her for a couple of months, I think, because we'd see her every day. And her and her husband got married late. She was from Chelsea, and they had this apartment around the corner. And we would go out. She would come out, and we'd go over to Revere. We'd take the tea over to Revere and get pizza at Asher's Pizza Place, and we'd go out to the mall all day. And yeah, Chris was the baby, and she used to say to me, send the kids over, whatever. She'd take Chris over, and one day he was just over there for a couple of months because we'd see each other, and we'd be going home, and she'd say, "Do you want to stay with Bubby? Do you want to stay with me?" So he'd go over there, and yeah, she was just a friend that I don't even remember how I met her. But yeah, that was B. She was an older woman. She was from California. She was good. She was good. We used to go over on Jewish holidays.
No, that was so I have a few little patchy memories from there, and then of course I can't recall. I mean that these memories I'm sure are overlapping between River Street and whatever other place we live near there. But then of course Sydney, most of my memories of early years are over there. And it's funny you had mentioned so that was with George. The one thing I always remembered was everybody called their father, in Boston it was Pa or Dad or whatever, and we always called George George.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know how that started either. I think he thought it was your fight. You're a lot like your father. Your father was a lot like you. Your father was very intelligent. He was very kind. He had a good heart. People loved him. And I think that was and he was a little, he was always thinking. And, I think that was his little, that was a nuance that he started.
yeah,
When you got older, it was like, well, you can call me George. Yeah.
sort of his, I guess, finger to the man.
Yeah.
But you mentioned, of course, him having the heroin problem and all that. We talked last time, and one of the funny things though was I wasn't aware. You told the story about me coming home all wet, and then me telling the background of that of almost drowning at Revere Beach.
Uh-huh.
And so, I mean, what was it like? I mean, with him having the addiction and stuff, was that from when you first met him? Did that run through all of these
It did.
locations, or
It did.
yeah, okay,
When I first met him, he was straight. He had just gotten out of detox. He used to go to the Washingtonian,
yeah.
that's the hospital in Forest Hills. There, it was right across from the train station. When I first met him, he was clean. He was working, uh, you know, and he told me about it. He said, when we first, he says, I had a drug problem and this and that. Uh, but he never was able to stay clean. I think the longest he ever stayed clean was probably 6 or 7 months.
Hmm.
When he was clean, he always had a job, and if he didn't, he was always involved with you kids. He really did. He loved you kids, but I could always tell when he was off immediately because he was nodding off when he talked to you.
Hmm.
He'd disappear and this and that. So yeah, it always was. And I never I always I always thought I was supporting him every time he went into the hospital. I mean, he used to spend he spent probably 4 months up at Mattapan State Hospital. They had a drug program up there. It was called Trio House, where they literally lived in these 3 houses on the grounds once they got sober and stuff. So I mean, he would do that, and I always felt it was, it was I should support him, and I had these, his kids and stuff, and he was a guy that was just, I mean, he was just a very good guy basically, but he never quite got it. And every time it happened, I'd go, yeah, okay. He would go into detox, and I'd be home trying to hold down the fort and stuff. But the last time, right before he committed suicide, he was really bad. And I had said to him, again, I told you that I'd been in AA, and I said, I can't stay sober. I'd never kicked him out before. And I said to him, you're going to have to go. Otherwise, I'm not going to stay sober. And I knew he wouldn't go far because his sister lived next door. So, it was a half-ass kind of like jolt him into reality. But I think at that point, it just got too, he wrote a suicide note saying, it'd be a matter of time, before the kids would find my needles and blah, 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 blah. So I think it was a moment of he just took a look at himself and said, he was depressed. He was a depressive. He probably just said, this is it. And as a matter of fact, that when they took him to the hospital and stuff, he didn't have drugs in his system. So he hadn't shot up that day or shot up or anything that day. But I think it was just a moment of, they say hopelessness. I say, weakness. I don't know. Because, I was involved with the Samaritans, and they have statistics saying that the people that were saved from a suicide, usually regret the fact that they tried to kill themselves. So I always considered a mental illness. I think it was just he was at his weakest point, and he had just had it. Everything was closing in on him. I think the last straw was probably me kicking him out. I don't know, because I never had before. But I was very serious about it too. Maybe he figured I was serious about it, because I said to him, I had said to him, I'm not going to die on this hill that you're dying on. I have to stay sober. So whatever the factors, I'm sure there were a lot of factors that went into it. And again, he called me at work that day. I was working at State Street in an office in town. And he called me and he said, and it was funny because I would get these teenage babysitters for when you guys came home from school and stuff. And what I was making was covering the babysitters. I wasn't paying bills. I wasn't doing a lot with the money, because it was just a matter of making sure that I had a babysitter. But he had called me that morning and said, I was thinking of going into Mattapan again. And I said, that's good. I was very supportive. I said, that's good. That's what you need to do. And I said, do you want me to bring the kids up on weekends? And he said, yeah, that would be nice. And I said, great, that's what we'll do. I said, get settled in. And, I'm at work. I can't discuss this, but get settled in. And, an hour later, they called and said that they had found him in Bill's garage. And it's funny, when I went home, he had left a suicide note in the house. So I found that. He said when he called me, he said, did you get my letter? And I said, no. I said, I was in a hurry. He might have left it there. I think he left it there the night before. We had a big chiffero in our front hallway, and there was always a ton of stuff on it. So he had left the letter there. I didn't notice it. I don't know what would have happened. That's the thing. You don't know what would have happened. But I said to him, no, I didn't get your letter. He said, well, I left it on the table in the hallway. I said, well, I'll read it. I'll get it when I get home. And, when you get settled, call me, and, I'll bring the kids up for a visit. And that was it. So it was just an odd thing.
So after George died, I know you had just gotten sober some time before that, but did you find And I know we talked a little bit about this last time we chatted, but did you find, I mean, was most of your support at that time through people you met in AA, or you mentioned Good Samaritans? Did you find them through AA, or how did you find whatever it was that helped you get through that?
Well, all of my support was people I was meeting in AA, and the reason why I was in AA, but the reason why I called Samaritans was because of because of the AA attitude. And when I went into AA, they said it doesn't matter. They say it doesn't matter where you came from, who you are, whatever. Our main purpose here is to stop drinking, don't pick up a drink. So AA was helping me to stay sober. I love the basic attitude of you just don't pick up a drink no matter what. But with suicide, that's a whole different thing because there's just, it's a different type of guilt than you have with alcohol. It's
Hmm.
a guilt that's, what could I have done? And that there's no answers. Like in AA, you go in and you hear everybody speak about their experiences, and you say to yourself, "Oh, I can identify with that. I can identify with that. I can identify with that." That's the reason why I was doing that. With suicide, there is none of that. I mean, you can't say I know the reason why he did it because he did it, and
Yep.
it's like why would anybody do that? So I reached out. I actually called on the line, and it was, I said, I don't know why, how, what. I was just devastated. And these people on the line, and this was very new, I found out it was kind of new in Boston. There were only, I don't know how many, they were working out of a church from somewhere in town. But I would call every night for a while, and they would listen to me. I would break down and cry, and it was 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and they didn't really have any answers. They just listened to you, and that's the reason why I picked up the phone with for the Samaritans was because I said AA works so good with keeping me sober. They must have answers on what to do when somebody commits suicide because that's their purpose. So I started doing that, and then along the line, it wasn't that long. It was only maybe a month or so on and off with them, but um, they really did. They kind of hung me in there till I got over the initial shock of everything that was went on as far as the suicide, and then I found that I could talk to people in AA about that and about my emotions or whatever. So I kind of stopped with the Samaritans, and they really helped me because, like I said, they just kind of got me through the initial shock. But then when Michael died, and there's just actually no word to describe what losing a kid is. There is no word in the language that I found so far, but I told you I'd been on a board at Blue Cross, uh, uh, giving grants out to organizations. They'd get, $1,000, 2,000. We'd meet once a month to decide who was getting these grants. It was just an overall section of the company. And, the woman said to me, I'm supposed to be at this, at this suicide. She says, but I can't make it. Will you go? She says, you just have to, tell them that we were happy to give them the grant. They just want to thank us. And I said, sure. And when I got up at the podium I said, I'm here on behalf of Blue Cross, and, I'm glad that we could help you. And, all of it, I said, I've had personal experience with the Samaritans, and I said, you people are angels. So then I got involved with afterwards. The woman said, can you speak at, our fundraiser? Can you speak here? Tell your story, which I did probably for about a year. on and off, and that's how I kind of got back involved with it, because I was just so devastated with Michael that I had no clue what. I mean, it was, I'd say to Jimmy, you get me out of bed, I'll go to work. Again, I think that was from my mother. It was like, you just you do what you have to do, get your ass out of bed. And I said to him, if you get my ass out of bed, I can go to work. And because I went to work right after Michael died, probably a week after Michael died, because I couldn't sit home with myself, and I just couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle seeing him in a coffin. I just couldn't handle it because I knew I was just going to fall apart.
Sure.
So I think that's that, Navy type thing, get up, it's probably the AA type thing, you got to work at it. Da, 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 da. So that's how I got involved with them. And then I got to a point with Samaritans. Again, it was just kind of a self awareness where, I didn't want to be the kind of the, like the director told me, we had taped little blurbs commercials, and she said, they like to put you on, it was just a 3-minute thing about the Samaritans, and she says, we usually put your thing on like early, like 2, 3 in the morning. She says, because you make people, you make people cry. And so I just got tired of that. I didn't want to be the face of, I didn't want to be, and I just kind of gradually got out of that. But that was, the Samaritans AA. I'm a very big proponent of people, kind of, as Garth Brooks says, people helping people. But I think that's it. I like to go to places where they know, like but except with Michael, like they've got these grief things, and I was so grief stricken that I just knew if I went to these grief groups that, where parents lost their kids, that it would just overwhelm me. I mean, I kind of just knew that it would overwhelm me listening to parents talk about their dead kids. I couldn't even imagine it. So I was lucky because I had a lot of, I had a lot of experience with AA and the Samaritans to where I was able to kind of muddle through. And they were my biggest support at the time. But, I always had my sisters. To this day, I can call up and be on the phone with my sister Beth for, 8 hours. And Kathy was always very supportive. And, I had with George died, Denise was there. And
But you mentioned earlier, and just quickly, because it's kind of one of the reasons, as I mentioned to you, with this new idea I have that I'm putting together is that idea of legacy. And I agree wholeheartedly with you that legacy is not just financial, right? Legacy is what's left behind. And but I wonder with George, what do you think of when you think of him? What impact has he had? Of course, if you're a parent, then your children can be your legacy. But is there anything beyond that? I mean, I wonder what it would be if you were going to kind of define that in any way.
I think he was probably, my one true love. I really did deeply love your father. And I think he contributed to making 4 wonderful kids. So I think he was just a, I still miss him. I would, because he was a great listener. He was just a kind soul. But I think that would be my legacy with him.
Mhm.
I feel bad that, he couldn't find whatever strength he needed. And I feel bad that you kids didn't get to know him better, because he was a wonderful person. So I
Yeah.
think his legacy is just, just leaving a kind of a bittersweet mark on my life. And I think like I said, he contributed to, making 4 great people. So
Yeah.
there's
Well,
definitely a legacy there.
yeah. 3 great people and me anyway, so I'll take
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But
I'll take all 4, no doubt about it. And that's what I said. It's funny, of all the people, of all of my kids, you are you look like him, you act like him. There's certain little things that you do that he used to do with there's a certain way you do something with your hands that reminds me of him, but you look exactly like him. When I remember one night when we were living on Oakton Avenue, I don't think I'd seen you. You were with Serena or whatever, but it was late, and you rang the doorbell, and they turned off the light, and you had grown. I don't know if you'd grown a beard or you had grown your hair or whatever, but as you were walking up the step, I said, "Oh my God, he looks just like his father." So, and you really do. He was like you. He was kind. He would do things and people wouldn't know. Like he was always, you know, uh, sending somebody, $30 if he had it, or he was showing up at some old lady's house. He would just, he'd shovel out driveways and stop the car. So he was a good person, and he was very humble. He was very screwed up, but he was very humble in a lot of ways. He would do things and people wouldn't know he would do them, and everybody loved him. My
yeah,
mother loved him because he was just a gentle guy, and I miss him. It's funny because when I think of him, I don't think of so much heroin addiction and all the shit he was we were going through and stuff. I just think of him as a good guy.
yeah,
So, he definitely and he was an artist. He could draw. I don't have when he of course when he got older he wasn't drawing or whatever, but he had a lot of talent. He
yeah,
just didn't, he didn't use it. He didn't, he was just heroin took everything he had, I think,
yeah,
to that was his quest every day he woke up was to get what he needed. And of course, when he got enough of it, he would just nod out. He wouldn't even know where the hell he was. But when he was straight, he was a good guy.